There's a very simple story continuing on our exploration into the absence of trying. And it's about an old man, not so very old, but he'd been a farmer all his life. So, having been through many, many seasons, he knew the way of the seasons. He'd also weathered many a famine, a time of drought, a time of deluge. So he knew the ways of nature. He'd also learned to listen to, observe the ants, the birds, the animals. So he had a way with the natural fauna of life. He lay down and surrendered to sleep each night without any expectation of what the morning would bring. But one day, in a season when it was time for harvesting, he was out reaping the wheat in the heat of the day, when of course the need for rest and thirst came over him, so he went to sit under a large tree. But as he lay down after quaffing out of his flask and eating his bread and cheese, chewing on a straw, he lay back and looked up. And when he looked up, he saw above his head an apple, a ripe apple. Oh, it looked so delicious. So reaching up his hand, it almost fell into his open palm. And he took it down, admiring its luster. He couldn't wait to take it back to his wife and daughter. He placed it in the middle of the kitchen table and called them to come and see. And when they did, they also admired this beautiful specimen, glistening red and green, and loving his daughter as he did, he said, "Daughter, I want to give this apple to you." And she said, "No, no, Father, this apple is fit for a king." And the farmer said, "Yes, this apple is indeed fit for the king, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it to the king." So, wrapping it carefully in a piece of cloth and taking a supply of bread and cheese and a flask for the road, he set out on the long journey to the capital. After several days and nights, when he arrived at the palace gates and asked to be admitted to see the king, the guards there, seeing his simple peasant clothing, said, "What would you want with the king?" And the farmer said, "I have a gift for him." Well, they argued. They wanted to send him away until someone decided that they should call the chief of the guards. And so they did. And when he came, the farmer showed him the gift that he had to give. And this guard, who seemed to have a modicum of awareness, admired the gift and said, "Yes, this is indeed a comely gift for the king, and he escorted the farmer into the presence of the monarch. And of course, without any preamble at all, and no usual salutations and all, because the farmer was a simple man. He just babbled. He said, I have a gift for you. I found it on my tree. And he opened the cloth and displayed this beautiful apple to the king, who indeed was impressed and immediately called over his queen also, and she too waxed lyrical about the beauty of this piece of fruit. And the king said, well, of course, bringing a gift, you will want a reward. And the farmer said, but no, I don't want anything in return for this apple. And the king said, yes, I can see that you have no expectation of a return of the gift that you've given, but you will not go away empty-handed. How did you come here? And the farmer said, I came by foot. The king said, well then you will ride home on a fine horse from my stables. And so he called his attendants to choose one of his finest steeds for the farmer to ride back to his home. Now, of course, when he left the palace, word had gone through the roads, the towns, and everyone knew what had happened. The farmer bringing the gift of an apple to the king and being rewarded by a magnificent steed. And of course it came to the ears of one somewhat greedy merchant who said, well, indeed, if this farmer can get a wonderful horse for an apple, what will I get if I give a fine gift to the king? So he decided to choose one of his own finest horses from his stables and take it as a gift for the king. So when he did, of course, being in fine clothing and all, he was admitted quite readily into the king's presence and explained to the king that he had bought this gift of one of his finest horses for him. And the king said, thank you very much, and turned away and went on with his business. But the merchant still stood there and stood there. So the king looked back and said, oh, well, I see that perhaps you're looking for a gift in return for the one you've given. And of course the merchant looked with expectancy. And so the king called one of his attendants and whispered in his ear. And when the attendant came back, he was carrying a tray with a cloth. And when the cloth was removed, there was the apple that the farmer had given, still fine and ripe and glistening lustrously as it was. And the merchant, of course, was taken back, and he said, you mean to say I just get an apple in return for my gift? And the king said, oh yes, but this is the most special of apples, because it was given by someone who had no expectations of anything in return. So looking at this simple story in relationship to our exploration into the place we're at, Have you recognized now that you have no expectations of not only what you give, but what you say and do? What about when we're walking down the street and we smile at someone and they don't smile in return? Do we react and think, "Oh, I smiled at you, why aren't you smiling back?" Or do we just smile because it's our nature to smile? What is it about this place? Can it be said that it includes an absence of expectation, of any kind of return? Have you looked? Have you experienced now? There's no need. Where does this lead us when we recognize in this place there's no expectation? And how does that relate to the recognition that we no longer have wants and needs? I need nothing from life, from you. How does the absence of expectation lead us to the recognition that in this place we no longer have need of recognition, reward,